Everyone has wondered at least once what it would feel like to be there, on that ship, on that night, to hear the sudden snap of silence before the chaos, to feel the chill of salt air as the stars hung still above the black Atlantic, to know that something once believed to be unsinkable was slipping quietly beneath the waves. The Titanic, a name the world has never forgotten. More than a century has passed, but her story still drifts through time, in photographs, in journals, and in the voices of those who survived. Not many did, but some did. This is one of their letters, written not in ink, but in memory, in sorrow and in love. Before sleep takes you tonight, let us drift together back to 1912, back to a young man with flower on his sleeves and hope in his heart, back to a ship they called a miracle, until the sea called it home. It was the spring of 1912, a time of transformation, when carriages still rolled down cobbled streets, but the sound of motor engines was beginning to echo behind them. When letters took weeks to cross the ocean, and yet the world somehow felt smaller every day. Across Europe, families dreamed of more work, more space, more life, and many believed they could find it in America, a land painted in golden hope and new beginnings. For them, the journey began with a single ticket, and if you were lucky, if you had saved just enough, that ticket might have been aboard the grandest ship ever built. The RMS Titanic was no ordinary vessel. Nearly 900 feet of steel and ambition, it was a marvel of its time. With electric lighting, luxury cabins, sweeping staircases, and even a heated swimming pool, she was a floating city, a symbol of human progress. Newspapers called her unsinkable. Her name whispered like a promise. She departed from Southampton on April 10, 1912, bound for New York. On board were over 2,200 souls, from first-class aristocrats in fur coats to humble workers and wide-eyed children in third class. Each of them carried a story, a reason for leaving, a reason to hope. But just 4 days into her voyage, in the stillness of the night, Titanic struck an iceberg. What followed was not just the sinking of a ship, it was the unraveling of hundreds of futures. Only around 700 people would survive that night. Most would never forget the sound of breaking metal or the cold that gripped the sea. Some never spoke of it again. But a few wrote letters, quiet recollections of what they saw, what they felt, and what they carried with them after the waves settled. This is one of those letters, written from memory, from grief, from gratitude. A letter for those who came after, and for you now before sleep. He was not famous, not a man of power or wealth, just a baker with flowers still clinging to his cuffs and a dream tucked quietly in his chest. His name was John Keane. He lived in a narrow brick house on the south side of Dublin, Ireland, where mornings began before the sun and the scent of warm bread drifted through cracked windows. His hands were strong from kneading dough, his voice soft from singing lullabies to his daughter Nellie as the ovens cooled. John was 31 years old. He had a wife, Margaret, whose laughter filled every room, and a little girl who liked to sneak sugar cubes from the kitchen counter. Life was simple and sometimes hard, but love, for them, was enough. Until it wasn't. Work had slowed, the bakery was struggling, and across the sea, in America, there were whispers of new opportunity, shops needing workers, streets paved with promise. When John was offered a chance to sail across the Atlantic and help open a bakery in New York, he said yes, not for himself, but for them. It would be the hardest decision he ever made, and the most important one he would survive. He packed a small satchel, a spare shirt, a photo of Margaret and Nellie, and a loaf of sourdough, still warm, wrapped carefully in a cloth. He promised he'd write from the ship, promised he'd send for them once he was settled, promised he'd be back if things didn't go as planned. On April 10th, 1912, John boarded the Titanic in Southampton as a third-class passenger and part-time kitchen hand, hired to assist in the ship's bakery. He thought it would be the journey of a lifetime, and it was, but not in the way he imagined. What follows is his story, in his words, a letter written not just to those he loved, but to anyone who has ever left something behind in search of something better. Dublin, spring of 1912. I suppose it began with flour, that soft white dust that clung to everything. My hands, my apron, the cracks in the old wooden table where I worked each morning before the sun had even dared to rise. I was a baker, not the kind with a storefront or a sign painted above a door, just a simple man kneading dough in a quiet corner of Dublin. The days were long, but the work was honest, and there was something comforting about the way bread rose with warmth and time. I lived with my wife, Margaret, in a red brick house just a few streets from the River Liffey. We had a daughter, Nellie, 6 years old, sharp as a thistle and gentle as a lamb. She liked to sit at the window when I came home, waiting to be the first to see me turn the corner. She'd run out to the gate barefoot, arms wide, every single day. We didn't have much. Rent came in coins we counted twice. The oven in the kitchen smoked more than it should. But love we had in handfuls. Margaret would sing while folding laundry, and Nellie liked to dance with the mop when we cleaned the floor. I can still hear the sound of her laughter when I close my eyes. Then came the letter. My cousin Michael had a friend who'd emigrated to New York the year before, a man who now owned a small bakehouse in Manhattan. He needed help, someone trustworthy, with strong hands and a good sense for bread. And he'd pay well. Not riches, no, but enough. Enough to send money home. Enough to eventually bring Margaret and Nellie across the ocean to join me. The job was real, the passage was arranged, and the ship I'd be sailing on, the RMS Titanic. At the time, I didn't know what to say. The name alone sounded like something from a dream. A floating city, they called it, the largest moving object in the world. There were articles in the papers, artist drawings of grand dining halls and shining staircases. It didn't seem like the kind of ship someone like me would ever step foot on. But Margaret read the letter twice, then a third time. She folded it neatly, set it on the table, and took my hand. "You should go," she said. I didn't answer straight away. My eyes were on Nellie, asleep by the hearth with her cheek resting on a book she couldn't yet read. "Only if you'll follow," I said softly. Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll be right behind you, I promise." The week that followed was a blur of preparation and silence. We didn't speak much about the crossing. There were no suitcases to pack, just a canvas satchel and the scarf Margaret had knitted the winter before. I tucked in a clean shirt, a photograph of the two of them, and a loaf of sourdough I'd baked myself the night before departure, something warm from home to take with me. The night before I left, we stayed up late. Nellie refused to go to bed until I promised, really promised, that I would write her a letter from the ship. "A real one," she said, climbing into my lap, "with my name on it." "Your name on the front and kisses all over the back," I replied. We fell asleep together in the chair, her small head on my chest. The fire burned low, and Margaret sat across from us, quietly knitting without looking at her needles. I think she just wanted to keep her hands busy so they wouldn't tremble. Morning came too fast. Gray skies, cold wind, a soft drizzle that clung to the street but never truly fell. I dressed quietly. Margaret laid out my coat. Nellie stirred once but didn't wake. I kissed her forehead and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "You be good for your ma'am," I whispered, "and wait for my letter." Margaret walked me to the door. She fastened the buttons on my coat like she always did, smoothed the front, and slipped the photo into my inner pocket. "You'll be safe," she said. "I know it." "You'll follow soon," I answered. "I'll build something good for us. Just wait for me." We didn't speak much after that. Some goodbyes don't need words. She kissed me once, long and slow, and then stepped back. Her hands stayed balled into fists at her sides, knuckles white. I turned at the gate to look back one last time. Margaret stood in the doorway, trying to smile. Nellie had come to the window, pressing her tiny hand against the glass. I waved. They waved back. And then I turned toward the street. My boots struck the wet stone with a dull, steady rhythm as I walked toward the train station. The mist hung low over the rooftops, blurring the edges of the world I was leaving behind. With each step, my chest ached a little more, but there was no turning back. I was leaving for them, for a better life, for a new beginning across the sea. I didn't yet know that the sea had plans of its own. The train from Dublin to Queenstown rattled like an old teacup in the wind. I watched Ireland roll by in blurs of green and gray, stone walls, thatched roofs, sheep scattered like clouds on hills. It was a country I knew by heart, and yet it already felt like something behind me. I shared a compartment with a woman and her 2 young sons. She offered me a boiled sweet from her pocket, and I gave one of the boys a corner of my bread. We didn't speak much, only enough to know we were all headed the same way. By the time we arrived, the port was buzzing. Men in flat caps shouldered crates and suitcases. Steam hissed from the tenders that would take us to the great ship waiting in deeper waters. There were accents from every corner of Europe: French, German, Polish, Italian. The air smelled of sea salt, coal smoke, and something else: anticipation. Then I saw her, the Titanic. She didn't look real, more like something carved from a dream, a cathedral floating on the sea. She stretched longer than the docks themselves, rising tall with 4 massive smokestacks and rows upon rows of glinting windows. People stopped just to stare, their voices falling quiet like they were standing in church. I stood there, rooted, as a steward brushed past and barked, "Third class to the tenders, keep moving." The small boat that ferried us out to her rocked gently on the waves. As we drew closer, her hull rose above us like a cliff of iron. I craned my neck to see the top. I couldn't. She disappeared into the sky. A boy next to me, maybe 16, nudged my arm. "Can you believe this?" he whispered. "No," I said. "I can't." We boarded through the lower decks, the third-class entrance. No grand staircases or chandeliers, just steel and wood and the sound of feet on metal. But it was clean and new. Everything smelled of polish and seawater and fresh paint. My bunk was in a cabin near the stern. 4 to a room. I was the last to arrive. The others looked up when I stepped in, all of us holding the same small bag and the same wide-eyed expression. "Name's John," I said, setting my satchel on the bed. "Tomasz," said a thick-shouldered man with a warm smile. Poland. Henri, said a wiry young fellow with a French accent, who immediately offered me a biscuit from his mother's tin. And this, he added, nudging the last boy, is Elliot, Scotland. He doesn't talk much. Elliot just gave a shy nod, then it went back to folding his shirt with a kind of careful pride that told me it might have been his only one. We didn't know each other, but we were all on the same path, chasing something across the sea. That was enough to feel like kin. That evening, I took time to explore the ship. From the third-class deck, I could see the stars begin to blink into view, and the wind carried music from somewhere above, faint notes of piano and laughter drifting down like perfume. The sea stretched out endlessly, dark and steady, cradling us in silence. Even from our place below, you could feel the grandeur. Everything aboard Titanic was built to impress. The seas, the steadiness, the very idea of it. I'd never seen electric lights like that, nor corridors so polished you could see your face in the floor. We weren't allowed into the upper decks, of course, but that didn't stop us from staring. Through a set of open doors, I glimpsed a ballroom, golden, glowing. A man in a crisp white jacket was pouring champagne for a lady in pearls. It was another world. But I didn't envy them. Not really. I had my bread, I had a bed, and I had hope. That was enough. Back in the bunk, we played cards by candlelight. Henri hummed something soft in French. Tomasz told a joke that didn't quite translate, but made us all laugh anyway. And Elliot, young, quiet Elliot, reached under his bunk and pulled out a sketchbook. He showed us a pencil drawing of the ship from the docks, done in fine, careful lines. It was beautiful. You should show someone that, I told him. He shrugged. Maybe. I drifted off that night to the low hum of the engines and the gentle rock of the sea. My hands were folded across my chest, and I could feel the folded photo of Margaret and Nellie just beneath them. Somewhere far behind was home. Somewhere ahead, something new. Something I hadn't dared to believe could be mine until now. That night, as sleep pulled me under, I didn't know I was aboard a ship that would become a legend. I didn't know how much would change. All I knew was that I had begun. And for a man who'd only ever known flower and fire and family, that was more than enough. There's a rhythm to life at sea, a different kind of heartbeat, one set by waves, bells, and the hiss of steam. It took only a day aboard Titanic to fall into that rhythm, like slipping into a familiar song I hadn't known I knew. My days began early, before most passengers had opened their eyes. I reported to the kitchens just after 5. I wasn't officially crew, but they'd taken me on as extra help in the bakery, and I was grateful for it. The head baker, Mr. Jalkin, was a barrel of a man with thick arms and a laugh that echoed like a drum beat. He kept the ovens hot and the jokes hotter. "You Irish?" he asked the first morning. "Dublin," I said. "Then you know your bread. Good. Grab a board." I did, and for a few hours each morning, I was exactly where I belonged. Elbow deep in flour, the air warm and rich with yeast. We baked hundreds of loaves daily, soft rolls, hearty brown bread, delicate pastries for the upper decks, and simple slices for the rest of us. Even in a ship of steel and steam, the scent of bread rising was the most human thing aboard. The kitchen was tucked deep in the belly of the ship. No windows, no view. But after the ovens were loaded and the trays stacked, I'd slip away for a few minutes and climb to the third-class deck for air. And that's where the magic lived. The sea stretched in every direction, smooth and silver in the morning light, bluer than ink by afternoon. Gulls circled overhead. The sky, vast and quiet, changed constantly. Soft gold at dawn, sharp blue at noon, then peach and violet as the sun dipped low. I wasn't alone on those walks. Tomasz liked to walk laps to stretch his legs. Henri chatted with anyone who'd listen, and Elliot, quiet Elliot, kept his sketchbook always within reach. He'd draw passengers leaning on railings, the ship's funnels belching smoke, and once he showed me a sketch of me rolling dough, my arms thick with flour. "You make it look like I know what I'm doing," I joked. He smiled. "You do." In the evenings, third-class passengers gathered in the common room. No polished chandeliers, but we had laughter, fiddles, and warm air that smelled of pipe smoke and stewed meat. I played cards with Tomasz and Henri. Sometimes we sang Irish ballads, Polish folk songs, anything anyone could half remember. There was a girl from County Mayo with a voice so sweet, people fell quiet when she sang. A young Italian boy who danced every time the music started. And an old Welshman who told ghost stories so vivid, we all slept with the light on afterward. For those few days, we lived like a family, a floating village of dreamers, workers, wanderers. One night I stood at the railing, alone watching the stars shimmer on the waves. It was hard to believe the world could stretch so wide and still feel so calm. I held the photo of Margaret and Nellie in my hand. My thumb brushed the corner. "We're getting closer," I whispered. "Just a little more." The days passed in a blur of bread and breeze. I got used to the sway of the ship, the hum of engines below my feet. I started recognizing faces, nodding to strangers who felt a little less like strangers each day. Henri told us he wanted to open a cafe. Tomasz dreamed of farmland in America. Elliot said very little, but I saw the hope in his eyes when he stared toward the west. On the second evening, I caught sight of the upper deck again. First-class passengers strolling in silken furs. I didn't envy them, not in the way some did, but I did wonder if they felt the sea the same way we did. If the stars looked different from where they stood. If the ship felt any more alive. I returned to my bunk that night with sore feet and a full heart. As I lay there, the ship rocking me like a cradle, I thought again of Margaret's last words. "You'll be safe." At the time, I believed her. I still wanted to, but something deep inside me stirred. Not fear exactly, but a whisper. A feeling that all of this beauty was too perfect, too still. I brushed it away. After all, the Titanic was a miracle, and miracles don't break. Not yet. I remember the quiet first. Not the noise, not the screaming, not the breaking. The quiet. It was the night of April 14th, 1912. I'd gone to bed a little later than usual. We'd stayed up playing cards. Tomasz grumbling about losing his coins to Henri's lucky hands. Elliot had finally cracked a grin that evening, a real one, which felt like something worth writing home about. I laid down last, folded the photo of Margaret and Nellie beneath my pillow, and closed my eyes to the usual lullaby of the ship, the low hum of engines, the gentle creak of metal, the soft, endless hush of ocean beyond the walls. But sometime in the night, that rhythm broke. I don't know what time it was exactly. Sometime near midnight, I'd learn later, when a strange sound pulled me from sleep. Not a crash, not an explosion. It was more like a long, deep sea, metal dragging across something heavy, then a kind of shudder, as if the ship had run over a ripple in the sea. My eyes opened. For a moment, I didn't move. I listened. The engines were still humming, but not quite the same. There was a pause between their usual steady beat, something irregular. Tomasz rolled over in his bunk. "What was that?" "I don't know," I said. Henri was already sitting up, rubbing his eyes. "Felt like we hit something." We pulled on our coats and boots without saying much more. It wasn't panic, just curiosity. The kind of thing you check, then laugh about over breakfast. The hallway outside was full of others doing the same. Sleepy faces, confused voices. Some in pajamas, others already dressed. There was no alarm, no rush. A steward walked by, stiff and brisk. "Everything's fine," he said, "just a precaution. Go back to your cabins." But he didn't look anyone in the eye, and that's when I felt it. That whisper again, deep inside my chest. The one I'd felt before under the stars when everything seemed too perfect. I didn't go back to the cabin. I followed the corridor toward the steps that led to the deck. The air was cold, much colder than it had been all week. I zipped my coat higher and kept walking. When I reached the open air, I stopped in my tracks. The sky above was clear. Thousands of stars, more than I'd ever seen. The sea was calm. Too calm. Not a wave in sight. Just an endless mirror, black and silver. And off to the side, just barely lit by deck lamps, I saw it. Ice. A jagged white shape, low in the water. Taller than I expected. Like a floating mountain, now drifting slowly behind us as if nothing had happened. That's when the questions started. A few passengers stood at the railings, whispering, "Did we hit it? Why are we still moving? Why hasn't the captain said anything?" Then a new sound, not from the sea, from below, the distant rush of water. My legs moved before my brain could catch up. I made my way down again, through the service corridors, to the kitchen level. Some of the staff were already gathering. Mr. Jochen was there, his sleeves rolled, looking pale. A baker I barely knew said he'd seen water in the forward compartments. "Flooding," he whispered. "She's taking it in fast." "Is that possible?" I asked. "She's supposed to be unsinkable," he interrupted. "That's what they said." But the fear in his eyes told me something different. Soon we were told to return to our cabins, and this time the steward's voice was sharper, more urgent, still polite, still trying not to cause alarm, but the words came faster now. "Life jackets on, please. All passengers prepare for inspection. Just a precaution." I didn't wait. I ran back to the cabin. Henri and Tomasz were already there. Elliot was sitting on his bunk, staring at the floor. "Get dressed," I said. "We need to go now." "They said it's fine," Henri replied. "It's not," I said. "Something's wrong. I can feel it." I pulled my coat back on, tied my boots tight, reached for the photo, folded it once, slipped it into my pocket. "Take only what you need," I told them. "If we get topside and everything's fine, we'll laugh about this. But if it's not..." I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. We left the room together. The hallway was louder now. Crying children, sharp voices, passengers asking questions no one could answer. We moved as a group, pushing toward the upper decks, only to find gates locked. Third-class corridors were cordoned off, stewards and crew keeping people contained. "They're opening first class first," someone muttered. "They're letting them off first." The word lifeboats hadn't been said yet. Not officially, but we all knew. Something terrible was happening. I looked at Elliot, then at Tomasz and Henri. We didn't say it out loud, but we understood one another in that moment. Get out, find a way, stay together. I reached into my coat, fingers brushing the edge of the photo. Margaret, Nellie. I closed my hand around it and held it there like a prayer. That was the moment, I think. The last one where I still thought this might end in something less than tragedy. The stars were still above us. The sea was still calm. But beneath our feet, the ship was dying, and none of us knew just how little time we had. When people speak of disaster, they often imagine screaming, panic, sirens. But that's not how it started. At first it was confusion, hesitation, like waking in a dream where nothing quite fits, where voices echo wrong and doors don't open the way they should. We were still below, trapped behind a gate. A steward, sweating through his uniform, barked orders to stay calm. Everything's under control. But his eyes darted toward the stairs like he wanted to run more than reassure. Someone pounded on the gate, others shouted. But the metal didn't move. Then someone, I don't know who, slipped away down a side corridor. Another followed, and another. No orders, no map, just instinct. Find another way up. So we followed, the four of us, me, Henri, Tomasz, and Elliot, keeping close, ducking through narrow halls meant for crew, through a half-lit pantry, up a service staircase. That was the first moment I felt real fear, turning a corner and seeing the water. Just a few inches, cold, creeping over the floor. But it was moving fast, curling past crates and boots. It was the kind of water that doesn't stop, the kind that wants everything. Keep going, I said, don't look back. We reached the next level, finally bursting through a door that opened onto a deck glowing under white electric light. And we were outside. The air hit me like a wall, freezing and sharp and loud. Now there were voices, shouting, crying, lifeboats. I saw one being lowered on the starboard side, mostly women clutching children. A man in uniform shouted, "Women and children only," while another waved his pistol at a group of men trying to climb over the railing. "There's not enough for everyone," Henri muttered beside me. We stared in silence. The ship was tilting now, just a little, but enough to feel it. The deck slanted under our feet as if the whole world had shifted without telling us. "We have to try," I said. "They're not letting men in," Tomasz replied. "Then we help them, and maybe they let us through." We moved toward a lifeboat where a young mother was struggling to lift her baby in. Without thinking, I stepped forward, took the child gently and placed him in the arms of a steward already aboard. "Thank you," she said, eyes wide with terror. I helped her climb in, then another woman, then an older man who stumbled, saying nothing, tears running down his face. The officer raised a hand. "That's it, lower it." I stepped back, heart pounding. "There'll be another one," Henri said. "We just have to keep moving." Around us, the crowd swelled. More third-class passengers had made it topside. Families, workers, children clinging to skirts. I saw an old couple holding hands, murmuring to each other in German. A man shouting names, someone praying. The deck was alive with fear now. Real rising panic. And still, the ship tilted more. The next boat had space. I knew it. It was only half full, but the officer stood firm. "Women and children." Then something happened I'll never forget. A young boy, no older than 12, stood beside me, thin, pale, shivering. He looked lost. "Where's your family?" I asked. He shook his head, couldn't answer. "Come with me," I said. I grabbed his hand and walked him toward the lifeboat, shielding him as we moved through the crowd. "Just the boy," the steward said. "He's alone," I shouted. The steward hesitated. The boy looked up at me, eyes glassy, and in that moment, I did something I still can't explain. I took off my cap, shoved it on the boy's head, and whispered, "Tell them I'm your father. Don't let go." We stepped forward together, and somehow, maybe by grace, maybe by luck, maybe by the mercy of a man who saw through the lie and let it pass, we were allowed through. The boat rocked beneath my feet. A rope creaked. I helped the boy settle onto the bench beside me. Around us, others sat stiff and silent. Women clutching children, a steward with a lantern, an older woman muttering the Lord's Prayer. Then, with a groan and the hiss of ropes, we began to lower. The deck above us disappeared. The people, the lights, the voices, all slipping upward as we sank toward the sea. The boy took my hand. I held it tight. I didn't know his name. He didn't know mine. But in that moment, we were the only family either of us had. When we hit the water, the shock of cold air stole my breath. The sea was glass, black, silent, waiting. I looked back up at the ship, and what I saw will never leave me. People climbing railings, others pressed against the windows, some still waiting, still hoping, still believing it would stop. But it wouldn't. Titanic was going down, and we were drifting away from her. When our lifeboat hit the sea, the cold took me by the throat. It wasn't just the chill in the air or the splash of salt on my face. It was a deeper cold, the kind that came from knowing I'd left people behind. People I knew, people I cared about. I didn't see Tomasz get into a boat, or Henri, or Elliot. We were all together just moments before. And now, I was alone. Well, not alone exactly. Samuel, the boy I'd pulled along with me, sat pressed against my side. His small hand gripped mine like he was afraid the sea might reach up and steal him away too. We drifted away from Titanic, slowly. The oars creaked, the water was calm, too calm, and the silence in our boat was heavy, like everyone had forgotten how to speak. Behind us, the ship still glowed. Lights shimmered from portholes and promenades. From this distance, you wouldn't know anything was wrong. She still looked like a palace on the sea, but then came the tilt. Gentle at first, then sharper. The bow sank lower. The stern rose slowly, almost gracefully. And that's when the screaming started. Not from our boat, from the others, from the deck, from the freezing water. I turned away. I didn't want to see if Tomasz was among them, or Henri, or Elliot. I held Samuel tighter, whispered something. I don't even remember what. I just needed him to stay still, to breathe, to not notice what was happening around us. A flare burst into the sky. Red light spread across the waves, painting the faces in our boat like ghosts. And then, the groan. Titanic let out a sound I'll never forget, a moan from her very bones, like the sea was tearing her apart from the inside. The stern lifted higher, water rushed over the deck. I could see people clinging to railings, trying to climb higher. A man fell, another jumped. Then the lights flickered and went out. Everything was dark. For a moment, the only light came from the stars. Then a roar, steel twisting, splitting. The ship broke. You could hear it, feel it. A snapping, thunderous sound that rolled across the water like a storm. One half disappeared. The other stood, almost upright, for just a breath. And then it fell. The ocean swallowed it whole. We all watched it happen. No one in our boat made a sound, not even Samuel. I scanned the water around us, hoping, stupidly, that I might see a hand raised, a voice call out. "Henri?" I murmured. "Tomasz? Elliot?" But there was nothing, just pieces of wreckage and silence. I thought of Henri's laughter, his mother's biscuits, of Tomasz telling jokes in broken English, always with that proud smile, of Elliot showing me my own hands sketched in charcoal, shy and proud in equal measure. We had only known each other for a few days, but out there in the dark, in the cold, they were the only family I had. And now they were gone. "You're all right," I whispered to Samuel or to myself, I couldn't tell. He nodded against my coat, but I felt his body trembling. The others in the boat sat in stunned silence, some crying, some praying, some just staring into the sea as if trying to will it to give something back. But it wouldn't. The sea keeps what it takes. The wind calmed, the water stilled, and the night stretched on. I remember thinking it strange how beautiful the sky looked above such horror. Stars glittered like diamonds scattered by careless hands. A soft breeze brushed my face. The surface of the ocean was smooth as glass, but beneath it, the Titanic was gone. And with her, so many voices. I didn't cry. Not then. I held it in for Margaret, for Nellie, for the friends who couldn't speak anymore, for the child beside me who needed someone to be strong. So I kept my eyes on the horizon. I kept my arm around Samuel, and I whispered into the wind, "Please, let this not be the end of us." The lifeboat drifted, the night deepened, and the world waited for morning. The hours after Titanic sank were the longest I have ever known. We drifted in a silence so complete it felt like we were floating through another world, a space between the living and the dead. Somewhere colder than the sea, quieter than any prayer. Samuel had fallen asleep against my side, his small body curled into itself like a question. His breathing was shallow but steady. I pulled him tighter against me, rubbing warmth into his arms, even though I had none left to give. Around us, the others in the lifeboat sat like statues. No one spoke. The creak of the oars, the slap of small waves against the hull, those were the only sounds. One woman sobbed softly, her face in her hands. Another stared ahead as if her mind had simply stopped. The sea had returned to calm, too calm, mocking even. It looked the same as it had before the ship went down. Smooth, endless, silver under the moonlight, as if the ocean could pretend it hadn't just stolen over 1,000 lives. But we knew, we all knew. I think the hardest part was listening. Listening for voices that never came. Listening for Tomasz's laugh, Henri's hum, Elliot's shy whisper. Nothing, just the wind. I kept hearing Henri's voice in my head, joking about the pastries, telling me I needed dough like an old man. I saw Tomasz shaking his head over his lost card game. I saw Elliot's hands sketching quietly in the corner, always watching. I had lost them, and somehow I had lived. A part of me hated myself for it. I looked at Samuel. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue. He needed warmth, but there was none to be found. I removed my scarf, damp as it was, and wrapped it higher over his ears. I whispered his name now and then, just to make sure he stayed awake, stayed with me. "Samuel," I murmured, "tell me something you like." He didn't answer. Anything, a color, a food, a song. His eyes fluttered open just a little. "Red," he whispered. "Red," I repeated. "That's a good one. My daughter likes yellow. She says it's the color of the sun, says it smells like honey." He closed his eyes again, but he was listening. I kept talking, steady, stories about bread, about Nellie, about anything that would anchor him here. Then came the whisper from across the boat. "A ship." A woman pointed, a blur of gray in the distance. "There," someone else shouted, and suddenly we were all looking, leaning, blinking through tears and fatigue. The Carpathia, I didn't believe it at first, not truly. It looked like a shadow, but as it drew closer, we could see the funnels, the lights, the people on deck waving. A real ship, a real answer to the hours we had spent between nowhere and never. The crew from Carpathia shouted directions. Ropes were tossed down, hands reached for ours. One by one, we were pulled from the lifeboat into arms that trembled with the weight of the living. I lifted Samuel first. He was barely awake. A steward took him, wrapped him in a thick coat, and disappeared into the crowd. "Wait," I called. "He's with me." "You'll be together again," the man shouted back. "He's safe." I wanted to believe him. Then my hands hit the rope ladder, and I climbed. Every rung was heavier than the last. My legs were weak, my arms shook, but I got there, somehow, and when I collapsed onto the Carpathia's deck, I lay there for a moment, cheek pressed to wood, breathing. The cold was still inside me, but I was alive. All around me, others sobbed, called names, searched for faces. Some clutched blankets. Others stared at nothing. I saw an older man kneel and kiss the deck, his lips white with frost. I stood slowly, scanning the deck for Samuel, and then there, huddled near a wall, wrapped in a thick coat far too big for him, eyes barely open. "Samuel," I called. He looked up. When he saw me, something changed in his face. Not a smile, he was too tired for that, but a soft loosening, like a knot untied. I sat beside him, pulled him close again, and for the first time in hours, I let myself cry. Not loud, not heaving, just tears, slow, quiet. For everyone we'd lost, for everyone who wouldn't climb a ladder, for everyone who would never hold their child again. I cried for Tomasz, for Henri, for Elliot. I cried for the girl with the voice like bells, for the old Welshman who told ghost stories, for the boy who danced when music played. And I cried for Margaret and Nellie because I would see them again, but others never would. The sun was rising now, pale gold, no fanfare, just light touching the sea, chasing away the dark one breath at a time. The nightmare wasn't over, not truly, but it was behind us now, and the morning, soft, steady, silent, was real. I took Samuel's hand in mine. "We made it," I said. He leaned into me. We did. And the sea at last was still. When the Carpathia pulled into New York Harbor, the sky was dark again. Rain had begun to fall, light at first, then steady, as if the city itself was mourning for what was lost. There were crowds waiting on the docks, pressed together in silence, umbrellas lifted like petals. No music, no cheers, just stillness, people holding signs with names. faces searching the deck for loved ones who would never arrive. I stood near the railing, Samuel tucked against me, wrapped in a borrowed coat 2 sizes too big. His fingers clung to mine. Neither of us spoke. The lights of Manhattan flickered in the distance, a forest of buildings, tall and gray and strange. I had once imagined this moment as the beginning of everything, stepping onto American soil with a suitcase and a dream. But that dream had changed. I didn't step off the ship. I carried off ghosts. Below deck, a steward handed out forms and blankets. Someone placed hot broth in our hands. I remember drinking it, even though it tasted like nothing. Even warmth felt foreign now. They asked for names, then for next of kin, then for who was lost. I gave them mine. I said I had no luggage. I didn't mention the photo in my coat pocket, the one of Margaret and Nellie. That was the only thing I had managed to keep dry. We were brought to a church basement that had been turned into a relief station. There were dry clothes, volunteers speaking in soft voices. A woman gave Samuel a pair of socks and a roll of bread. He turned to me before eating it, as if waiting for permission. "Go on," I said. "You've earned it." I didn't sleep that night. My mind was too full, not just with memory, but with noise. The sound of water, of metal tearing, of people calling names in the dark. They played behind my eyes every time I blinked. But I stayed beside Samuel, and he beside me. In the morning, I sat down with pen and paper. It took me a long time to write. My hands shook, my thoughts tangled like ropes in the wind. But I had made a promise. The letter to Margaret began with 3 words. I am alive. I told her everything I could, about the ship, the night, the friends I'd made, the ones I'd lost. I told her about Samuel, how he'd held my hand, how he still did. I don't know why I survived, I wrote, but I think it was for you, for Nellie, and for him. Maybe I was meant to keep him safe until someone else could love him again. I mailed it the same day. I don't know how long it took to reach her. Weeks, probably. But I pictured her reading it by candlelight, her hand pressed to her chest, tears falling onto the envelope. I imagined Nellie asking, "Is Daddy coming home?" And Margaret saying yes, because now she could. In the days that followed, I was offered lodging by a local baker who'd heard my story. I swept floors. I kneaded dough. I didn't speak much, but I worked. Bread made sense to me. It rose when it was given warmth. It became whole through fire, like me. Samuel stayed nearby, housed by a kind couple with no children of their own. I visited him each week. He grew stronger, smiled more. He asked if I would still be his family, even when he had another. I said, always. And I meant it. Weeks turned to months. Spring gave way to summer. The scars of that night didn't fade, not from memory and not from the world, but life. Life kept rising, just like bread. Eventually, I saved enough to send for Margaret and Nellie. I wrote a new letter then, one with hope in it, one without tears. I told them where I was, what I was building, what I was waiting for. The day they arrived, I stood at the dock in the same rain I had arrived in. But this time, I wasn't holding ghosts. I was holding flowers. Nellie ran into my arms first. Margaret followed. We held each other for a long time, saying nothing, needing nothing but the feel of one another in that moment. I never forgot the Titanic. I never stopped hearing the water or the silence that followed. I never stopped seeing Tomash's wide smile, Henri's sketches, Elliot's soft eyes, but I lived. And if you are reading this now, in the quiet, in the stillness before sleep. I want you to know something. Survival is not just about staying alive. It's about remembering. It's about continuing. It's about love that holds on even after the water comes. I was just a baker, but I carried a piece of history across the ocean, and I brought it home. And so the letter ends, folded not with sorrow, but with peace. John survived. He baked again. He held his wife and daughter in his arms again. He lived a quiet life, not in the shadow of what was lost, but in the light of what still remained. The Titanic rests now beneath the ocean, far from the stars she once sailed under. But stories like John's carry her forward, in memory, in letters, in quiet voices at bedtime, just like this one. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not the loudest. They are the ones whispered just before sleep, the ones that remind us that courage can live in ordinary people, that love is a kind of anchor, and that survival is its own kind of grace. You are safe, you are warm. Like John, you have made it through your own long nights. And now, it's time to rest. Let the sea be calm. Let the stars above hold steady. Let the story drift away on gentle waves. There is nothing more to do tonight. No place you need to be. Just this breath and the next. Tomorrow will come in its own time. But for now, let go, close your eyes, and sleep.